Okay, hello ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Simon Beardsley from Lincolnshire Chamber of Commerce, and a very warm welcome to you and to this ChamberConnect webinar. I'm here today as the host of the session, which will focus on well-being and remote working. Thank you for joining us and connecting with us virtually today. Our ChamberConnect series have replaced very much our standard face-to-face events that we normally run, but at this time we feel it's still vitally important to connect and inform. I'd just like to make you aware that we will be recording today's webinar, and it will be available on our website shortly afterwards for you to download and view again, or as a resource for others to come back and look at as well. So we're now over about 2 weeks into the lockdown, with new ways of working, remote working slowly becoming the norm for many of us. And as a chamber, we've been continuing to support you, your staff and your businesses, keeping you up to date, sharing the latest information. We've been working hard with our colleagues at British Chambers of Commerce as we seek to gain further clarity over issues such as the various business support that's available, but also acting as the business voice both locally and nationally. We're currently gathering information and intelligence on how businesses are finding their experience of getting access to the government support schemes. So please share with us your experience, whether it be positive or negative, at marketing@links-chamber.co.uk, marketing@links-chamber.co.uk. And throughout the period, we've been trying to keep you up to date with information. We've got an information COVID hub on our website, www.links-chamber.co.uk, with lots of hints, tips and answers to frequently asked questions. If you're not connected with us by LinkedIn, can I suggest that you do so? We've got lots of information that goes out that way as a mechanism of keeping you informed. We've been also sharing stories on our Stronger Together hashtag, messages about the wider community, working together and sharing experiences as well. We're also introducing a hashtag Links Connect Hour initiative, which is our first Twitter networking hour, which the first one of those will take place on Wednesday, the 15th of April, between 11 and 12 noon. Use the hashtag to engage with fellow businesses, to share stories, best practices, or even share your own home working space. Okay. We'll continue to do this every Wednesday and Friday at 11 AM. And results and feedback is why we're here this afternoon and led to the series of Chamber Connects webinars themselves. In a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Phil Hutchinson from Lantern, the Reverend Canon Alan Green, and also, Reverend Canon Alan Robson, I do beg your pardon, Alan, and Rosie Green from Solutions for Inclusion. And this is very much expected to be an interactive session. The guys will go through a short presentation themselves very shortly, and Phil will focus on hints and tips for dealing with stress whilst remote working. Reverend Canon Alan Robson will focus on loneliness and isolation, and Rosie will follow up with understanding the demands around remote working. And as I just said there, it is very much about getting you involved, asking questions and making it a two-way conversation rather than just a presentation. There are two ways to do that on the Zoom platform. Along the bottom, you'll find a box that says chat. If you click on that, it will open up a box to the right-hand side. There's an opportunity then for you to type a message at the bottom. It will come through to us and we can ask questions that way, or we can come to you in terms of the video. There's also an option over participants. If you click on that, if you then click on raise your hand, a virtual hand will be raised and we can come to you with that question later on as well. Now, we expect the session to run between about 45 minutes and an hour. So put your questions in throughout the session. We certainly will come to you. I've already got some that have been sent in before, so we'll probably start with those and then we'll come to you individually with the other questions thereafter. Now, I think we're going to start off with Alan, if that's okay with you. So let's hope the technology is holding up. And Alan, over to you, please.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's good to hear you if I can't see you all. I'm Alan Robson. I've been the agricultural chaplain in the county for 20 years. And if anybody works remotely, I suspect everyone feels farmers are one of those in one of the categories of professionals who work remotely and live in isolation. And over the last 20 years, through the charity I founded in 1999, we've been dealing with a lot of farming families, farm workers who have bear with, sometimes collapse through this type of isolation. And I guess the things are the thing where we feel there's minimum protection sometimes. And in farming terms, that's the vagaries of banks' policies. In farming terms, definitely the weather. This has been an atrocious year. There have been issues around family breakdowns and in other instances in ill health. And sometimes all 4 or 5 or 6 of these issues. And mental well-being is a real challenge to keep a hold when you don't feel protected. And so the attitude, the route to feeling maximum support that enables people to get through those things are all the things that you're all engaged with, I'm sure. Maintaining those quality relationships, and you're finding those now. There's a lovely quote by the Sufi mystic Rumi, where there is ruin, there is hope for treasure. Well, we can only hope that that's the case through these next few weeks and months. I've just come off another Zoom call with regard to mental well-being through the National Centre of Rural Health and Care. And it's that connectivity which is the challenge that we all have when we have been compelled to social distance. But modern technology is helping enormously, but it doesn't always quite mitigate the inner feelings or help us manage the challenges when some of our relationships may not be as easy to live with. But for myself personally, I work from home most of the time. I go out into the countryside to meet families, and I'm sure Phil will touch on many of the things that tools and models you can use to remain resilient and resolute to move through. All of us will feel moments of intense disorientation from our norm, what makes our identities. And so I have a gratitude diary as a little tool. I concentrate on one thing or a couple of things in a day which have made me smile or brought a bit of joy to my life. And one was seeing 2 rare birds in the garden that I've never seen before in all my time here in Lincoln. So, and it's the quality of the relationships, the quality of understanding what makes us alive and well and thrive. I often think the personality types, the people who say the glass is half empty or glass is half full. I think this is a time not even to ask the question of that. The question is, who needs the water and how do we get it to them? And we need to keep an eye on our neighbours and keep an eye on ourselves when we need that support and not be frightened to ask for it. And that's been the major challenge in the farming world, to enable them to feel good mental health is a good thing and be brave enough to communicate when they need that help. And thankfully over the 20 years, I think some of that stigma is beginning to relent a bit, and people are having the courage to reach out, which is vitally important. So I think that's all I'll say. I think there is hope through the quality of relationships, developing in ourselves and around us a climate of hope and love and compassion that always overcomes fear. And yeah, there'll be a lot of rethinking, reframing how we behave toward one another in our private lives as well as in our businesses, to build better communities in each of them. I'll stop there.
you, Alan. That's really kind. I'm going to go over to Phil now.
Hello. Right, I've got some thoughts based around personal resilience. Two topics: personal resilience, and also how that can apply to working at home, because obviously those are big problems for lots of us, and I'm sure going to be touched on by Rosie's input. The thing is, before we start talking about personal resilience, it's useful to understand the definition of stress. So stress is defined as the mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from challenging or difficult circumstances. So mental or emotional strain or tension, stuff that's going on in here or stuff that's going on here, and that's caused by difficult external circumstances. The thing with stress is that it causes us as human beings to go into the FFF mode, which is to fight, flight, or freeze. So we either have to fight the cause of the stress or the problem, we run away from it, or we freeze and hide. And the problem that we've got in circumstances like this is that the cause of the stress is too big. It's too big for us to be able to influence. There's no getting away from it. So you can run as far as you like, and doing nothing has absolutely no impact whatsoever. So what we have to do in situations like this to keep our own levels of resilience high and our stress levels low is to focus on the things that you can control and that you can influence. So 3 things in this section. First one, keep connecting. Just like Alan was saying, we as part of the human race have a basic fundamental need for connections. It's almost like tribe. We need to connect with other people. We need things from interactions with other people, whether that's friends or family. And obviously we can't do that in a face-to-face. So this kind of stuff is fantastic. I did a Zoom group chat the other day with a bunch of friends, some of whom are on here. And it was the first time I've seen faces for weeks, and it had a real impact. So the first thing is to keep connecting. The second thing is about distraction. So when you can't get away from the cause of the stress, you need to be able to distract yourself from it. So different people do different things, but distraction technique is basically anything that makes you feel good or gives you some kind of positive vibe. So, I mean, there are different people doing different things all over the country. People are gardening, cooking, baking, barbecuing, studying or learning. I've got a friend who's studying a new language, painting or sculpting, reading, walking, obviously take your hours worth of exercise, knitting, crochet, decorating. I mean, the amount of people that are doing up their home and doing up their garden seems to be incredible. I think the B&Q sales must be going through the roof. But any kind of exercise is a good thing. I don't know if you can see over my shoulder there, but that's Mr. Stay Puffed. And if we don't do enough exercise, I think like me, you probably end up looking like Mr. Stay Puffed. So there's something about your physical health as well as your mental health that comes from exercise and activity. So that's number 2. The third thing is about reframing. Reframing for positivity. We as a society have a tendency to wallow in the muck, like a dog when it finds something stinky and it rolls all over it in the garden. We have a tendency to propagate that negativity. I don't know what the basis is from our survival instincts. Maybe it's something about sharing negative or bad news with the tribe, but there's something about reframing, because it's really easy to fall back into that habit of sharing and being negative and complaining and telling everybody the bad news. There's something here for me about being a lighthouse or a beacon, a shining light for other people. If you can focus on your positivity and share that with other people, there is a knock-on effect, whereas that positivity is picked up by friends and colleagues. There's something in the concept of the lighthouse about keeping people safe and guiding people. So there's something here about being the best version of yourself. Decide who you want to be and decide what that person's going to react like, decide what that person's going to say. And then when you've come up with your own definition, that stands a much more higher chance of you actually achieving it, because it's yours. It's your decision. It's your definition of what success looks like. There's something about silencing the doom and the gloomers, you know, those people who are like the Dementors from the Harry Potter films. Turn them off, turn the Facebook off. You can't get away from it on the television. It's not about burying your head in the sand, but actually our media thrives on this sort of negativity and sharing all the bad news. So give yourself a break from it. I mean, it's all very well, turn it on and keep yourself up to date with what's happening, but turn it off. And then the last bit in this section is about doing those random acts of kindness. There's something about sharing the positivity, whether that is literally just you sharing some lighthearted stuff or helping other people or putting words of advice out there or just something to make people smile. But those random acts of kindness that that we can do for strangers or friends really helps push that positivity. It's a bit like drops of food colouring in a fish tank. You know, you put one little drop in, okay, it doesn't do anything, but if 10 of us put those drops in or 100 of us put those drops in, eventually you start changing the colour of the water. So there's something here about getting that flavour of positivity. The second part, very briefly, is just around the working from home concept. So remote working, I know Rosie's going to focus on. So with regard to your well-being and your levels of personal resilience, there's something about balance here. Not rocket science, this one, getting the balance between home and work life. I know you're at home, but work and non-work. And there's something else around routine. A lot of people have put a lot of information out there on setting a routine, which is easier said than done. So if you want to set a routine, you can do 4 things. Decide when you do your best work. Decide when your household is at its quietest. You know, it doesn't have to be 9 to 5. If you're a morning person, then do your work in the morning. Decide when your colleagues and contacts are working. If you've got to work with other people, you've got to be in tune with when they're around. So there's something about understanding when you have to work as well as when you are best at working. And then decide what your non-working relationship commitments are, working around those. The other thing in relation to this is about choosing your working environment. I know a lot of us don't have a great deal of choice in where we're working. I can see Rosie's lovely fireplace behind her. Alan's obviously in a study or somewhere. This is my spare room, full of all my distractions and mess. I put a video on the other day about the distractions of working at home, and it's too difficult to turn the PlayStation on or to read a book or to watch a film or something like that. So consider where your best work is going to be done and plonk yourself in there. The final part is around setting some goals, just achievable goals. What is it that you're going to achieve? Why are you doing it? How are you actually going to achieve those goals? Where are you going to do it? Who do you need to help you? And when are you going to have it done? So they're just the concepts of SMART targets. So basically, personal resilience, keep connecting, keep distracting yourself and reframe for positivity, working for home, get the balance right, decide on your routine, consider your working environment and set yourself some goals. And hopefully that will keep your positivity up and your personal resilience levels high.
Well done, Phil.
Excellent, thank you, Phil. So I'm going to go over to Rosie now. So some more understanding the demands around remote working. Rosie.
Okay, thank you, Simon, and thank you, Phil, and Alan too. So I've been asking people across the country and the world about how they're adjusting to working from home. Fortunately, I've had experience of that, so I know what it's like to be doing our best to work, plus juggle family and friends and studies. So in terms of that, what I think we have to do, whether we're a CEO of a company or running a household, is acknowledge that there's change and that everyone adapts to change in a different way. And from that, we also think about, as Phil's reframing and how Alan mentioned about the rural communities. But there's I was in Lincoln yesterday, and people in the cities are obviously dealing with the challenges of working from home in a different way to those people who are, perhaps living remotely. I've personally found it, I've had to prepare for working from home in the context of my sort of regular lifestyle, which includes going down to London and interacting with people. So for me, even things like going to do the supermarket shopping is actually part of my self-care. So I think what I'd urge people to do, whether they are the CEO of a company or whether they are a single parent, thinking about how they can adapt to these new structures is to literally put some structure into their lives, which is again, I think, a theme that Phil mentioned and Alan, and actually maybe choose to have some family time, utilise that time for asking what people would like to eat. Think about those meals and putting some healthy aspects into the food. And as we're about to have Easter this weekend, think about who is not going to be around, and to reach out for those people, maybe include them through FaceTime or set up a Zoom room or something like that, so that the people who are living on their own in this context of lockdown are included in some way. And one of the other things I'd urge people to think about is whether they are thinking about the structure from an organisational role. CEOs of companies that I've been having conversations with, they are very much aware that people are working sometimes for the very first time in their whole working lives away from an office, away from the support of a team. So again, if you are that CEO or you are delegating to people who are keeping an eye across the country or world with colleagues, then just check in with those people maybe once a day, maybe encourage the setting up of WhatsApp groups or something like that, so just so that people can choose different platforms to communicate. And then again, think about it from the family's point of view as well. Does your particular organisation offer any support for people with families? Again, there are some companies where their staff have gone into a furlough situation. Is there someone that's a leader or someone within your organisation who could be responsible for the workplace wellbeing, even though the workplace is now in people's homes? And then please consider the employees who are living on their own, because they too might be living and existing for the first time in their lives without any support. And some of the strategies that Phil suggested were against many that I'm hearing about and advocating as well. Some people, again, with their distance learning, perhaps allow for that. If there's someone in your home that's studying, what I've heard from someone today is that her course has totally gone online. So not only has she studying on her own when she normally goes into a university setting, she's also having to adapt to the new structure, and that's adding to fitting around her work and family. So again, I think it's about remembering that everyone is dealing with a different set of challenges and changes. Some are embracing it, some families are enjoying their walk together and just benefiting from not travelling across the country and the world in terms of work. And I think for our children as well, if our children are old enough, then are they able to reach out to their friends? Are they included in WhatsApp groups, or are they able to pick up the phone and speak with their peers? Because that's certainly something that's happening with some of my friends and family. But again, we're in a very rural setting, and I'm very aware that some families, certainly in the inner cities, may not actually have laptops or the type of methods for their children to be able to keep in touch with their peers. I guess some are still going into school, but that's not the case. I know that some schools have had to close and hubs have been set up. So I think it's around us being considerate of everybody and the individual challenges and benefits that people are embracing right now. Again, in terms of self-care, we can move forward to the aspect of the routine where, yes, we have many people are working from home. Some, again, are also helping their children learn in a remote kind of setting. And then it's the other aspects as well about putting some self-care into that routine. So if going for a walk is something that you enjoy, then do that. Joe Wicks seems to be part of the routine for many families at 9 o'clock in the mornings, doing some exercise before home study or whatever. So again, if that works for you and your family or something like it, then please put those kind of things in, because we all need our endorphins inspiring and moving about, and that makes such a difference. In terms of the actual setting, for me, what I tend to do is I move around where I'm working. That seems to help as well. So having places where I have a garden office, but sometimes it's good to come to a different place for me to recalibrate. So again, think about the settings, think about the ergonomics, and please, please, please include time for meals and having a walk in the garden or going up and down the stairs, just something so that there is an aspect of variety in your day too. In terms of other things that people could perhaps do, there are a plethora of apps that can be utilised for stress and the anxiety that Phil mentioned. I personally enjoy reaching out to people. I enjoy exercise, but also meditation is really helpful for me and for many other people at the moment. So even if people are not really used to doing that, then it's maybe now's a good time to adapt different things into their lives to be part of that self-care. And again, in terms of think about, there are other things in terms of learning. I know that the Harvard Business School have got some courses. I know the Open University have got some free courses as well. So for some of us, it may be a time for us to just learn about something different. So I think, again, if I go right back to the beginning, it's around acknowledging the change and being very kind and embracing the fact that everyone will be dealing with it differently, and to be very considerate as to how those people are dealing with it, and to reach out and help in whatever way we can, so that that collaboration is something we do, whether we're a CEO, whether we're frontline worker, but remembering to be kind and considerate at this time.
Rosie, thank you. That's another excellent insight there. I've got some questions that were sent in beforehand, which I'll ask for some help in terms of you guys shortly. Just encourage the audience who are listening, if you've got some questions that you either want to put as via a chat, use the chat option at the bottom of the screen, or raise a virtual hand, and to do that, click on participants, click on raise hands, and we can come to you and ask you those questions directly. But I suppose the questions I got for a start do focus on some of the things you've said already. One of them is around reasonable working hours. For the workaholics of us, that it's easy to switch on the computer. It's easy to have an excuse of just being there a little bit longer because you're not in the car, and you can justify sitting here for 2 hours longer a day. There is an impact ultimately in doing so the longer you do it, and that probably then adds another half an hour on as well. Any hints, tips or suggestions of how to be more robust in terms of time you spend in front of the computer?
Shall I answer that one? So yes, okay. Well, I think, as I kind of alluded to earlier, around putting some structure into your day. So include some breaks, include a comfort break. Okay, so very few of us have now got a water cooler time, but perhaps if there are other people working in your household as well, maybe everyone get together and have a coffee, or go out into the garden, or just recalibrate together. That's perhaps a good idea. And yes, and I spoke with someone today, and what she's doing, and again, member of the Chamber of Commerce staff, she literally is doing her best to go for walks and get some fresh air and things at the end of each day. So obviously working the hours that are required, taking the breaks, and making sure that there's some fresh air and exercise after work, so that there's some element of relaxation and self-care before bed and the next day at work.
Could I just add, I've been a workaholic. I've been such for however long, but in the last 15 months, I've had to restructure my life. And part of that, because I was burning out, was pausing to read. And I think what Rosie said about making space for meditating, a perfect time. It's a tragic time, but this is a perfect opportunity to, if you're a workaholic, to stop being a workaholic. You die too quick. It's not good for you. And so, thankfully I had an opportunity 15 months ago, 18 months ago, to rethink how I was doing things and spending time to think. And A brilliant writer called Margaret Wheatley talks about creating islands of sanity. You know, if you're a workaholic, you're not really being sane, really. And creating island of sanity is about putting all those structures in, learning new things, making space to breathe, to let your brain rest and cool down a bit is vitally important, and sleeping well. When you're a workaholic, you tend to, even in the middle of the night, you're going at it. And sometimes that's great entrepreneurial stuff, but learning how to sleep well, rediscovering sleep patterns is pretty important. And I like Phil's, you know, the very thing, the 3, 5, fly, freeze. I discovered another one the other day was faint.
Mm-hmm.
Just, it's near enough freeze, but it's something different. But there you go. Phil.
I don't even know how to spell workaholic, so my inputs on it are limited. But I think it comes back to balance for me. I would mirror what both Alan and Rosie have said, but it's balance. If you don't get the balance right, and this is no different to, you know, working in an office. I know what you're saying, Simon, that the temptation is for those people that have got a desperate need to get stuff done, or it's worrying, or this. Sometimes some people throw themselves into work as a release to the stress that we were talking about earlier. But if you don't get the balance right, it's going to result in inactivity, failure, burnout, and health damage, physical or mental. I use the analogy of one of these damn things when I'm training personal resilience, because they are incredible devices. You know, the smartphone devices are very clever. They can do all sorts of things and multitask. You can check your emails. You can look at messages from your friends. I'm not going to read that. You can check your Facebook. You can go on the internet, blah, blah, blah. But if you're not careful and you overuse it, the phone runs out of battery and battery level dims, and you get into that dangerous low power mode. It'll still operate. It will still function as a phone, but the screen will go dim. You won't be able to look at the internet anymore. You won't be able to browse your emails. You'll still be able to make an emergency call. So it's a bit like a degenerative graph. Your energy level dips. And if you don't do, like these guys say, if you don't do the proper recharge, whatever that activity involves, if you don't do the proper recharge, you don't get a full charge back on your phone. You get it up to like 70 or 80%. You think, oh, that's enough. I'll crack on. And then the next day it continues to dip down a little bit further, and it gets up to 70%, and then it dips down. And of course, as we see, it degenerates down to the bottom line where you're actually working on low power mode all the time. And that's when the health risks appear. So I don't think there's any one fixed answer for anybody on what the right number of hours would be, but I don't see why you wouldn't apply the same concepts of balance and routine to working in your normal office environment. But the recharge is really, really important, more important than ever, I think, in these circumstances, because when your energy levels drop, your resilience levels drop.
Thanks for that. I'm going to bring David Regler in now. David's posted a question which I've got an affinity to why you're asking this, because I've got the same sort of questions in my head about this. So, David, if you're there, do you mind just replaying your question for me, please? I'm just going to unmute you. Can you hear us, and are you able to replay your question?
Yes, I certainly can. I'm assuming you can hear me okay?
We can, yeah, perfect, thank you.
So, yeah, essentially, I do quite a few Zoom calls during the day. Pretty much like some of your speakers, I've been used to working from home, but a common thing that I'm hearing recently are people who are finding that they're doing quite a lot of back-to-back Zoom calls or multiple Zoom calls in the day. And an example of a comment would be, you know, back in the normal days, you'd probably have a walk to a coffee machine in between, or you'd even have a drive between meetings, but now it seems that we've kind of condensed our time, and Zoom calls can take quite a lot of focus to keep engaged with. So my initial question there was whether there were any recommendations on how best to schedule your own time. And I suppose an additional question could be to employers who are and managers who are now operating with remote teams. Are there recommendations of how you can best schedule these calls during the day to make everyone as effective as possible.
Well, David,
Very quiet, didn't it?
yeah. One who's had a 2.5-hour Zoom session this morning, and then I'm about to leave to another one. I'm not the best example today, but I have committed to having 2 Zoom-free days this week, and I've been asked to go on a number of others tomorrow, and I'm just not doing it. Sometimes I think my contribution will be really wonderful and amazing and helpful, but actually, really, is it? There are lots of other skilled and imaginative people around, so I'm committing myself to not doing Zoomy every day. I could fill my week with Zooms, but it is that discipline. It's that self-discipline to say, yeah, I'm not the center of the world, and the world won't end if I don't contribute. But on that note, David, good to hear you again. Simon, I'm going to sign out to my next Zoom, I'm afraid.
Okay.
We definitely appreciate your help anyway. Sorry, Rosie.
Okay, sorry. Bye, Alan.
Bye.
Okay, so I think if it's a really important point as well, because for some of us, we're actually interacting with people across the world. So if there is a CEO or a director or someone who's actually overlooking what's going on with their workforce, please make reasonable adjustments whereby, so yesterday, for instance, I had a Zoom meeting with someone in Australia. So that was definitely before 9 a.m. UK time. And then conversation with someone in Canada or in America, they are very different time slots as well. So I think it's really important for us to account for the context of our work and for the context of the work for our employees, and really make reasonable adjustments, because just because they're not clocking in perhaps at 9 a.m, maybe they've already had a conversation with someone across the world. And so I think for me, it's around having those shared platforms, but also encouraging decision makers in organisations to be thinking a little bit out of the box in terms of how collaboration and supporting their employees looks right now.
I think there's a risk that it's also the new trendy thing, isn't it? I mean, everybody seems to be Zooming, and I think it's a brilliant thing, but actually I don't think it takes away any of the same decision making, any of the decision making tools about whether you were going to have a meeting in the first place. You know, the old famous joke about people having a meeting to decide what happens in the meeting. You know, this new technology, as fantastic as it is, everybody wants to be getting on and doing it, but actually do you even need one? I guess I suppose you are sometimes at the behest of people who are calling these meetings, but I think there's just a danger of it being overused, because like all the same before it disappeared, you know, otherwise you could have after another. So just something about scheduling and balance again, isn't it?
Okay, so I'm going to take you on to a slightly different subject. As a leader of a team, what we're going through now can be very anxious for the team that you lead, and it can also be stressful as a leader of that team as well. Have you got any tips, hints in terms of how a leader should be going about reassuring the team, but also taking care of themselves at the same time?
I think I've just done this in a training session. Obviously, Rosie can give her input as well. But I think there's something somebody said the other day about how sometimes managers, upon promotion, forget about being people. Something really important about staying connected with who you are, remembering what it was like to be a follower and a worker. You know, it's not all about statistics and production and all those kind of things. And what would you need if you were part of a team? So I think any good leader should keep connected to what they need as a person as well as a manager, you know, and it comes down to communication and reassurance for me. Constant theme that comes up in any management and leadership training that I've ever delivered or been on is always about effective communication. And without that communication, how can you reassure? How can you check in? How can you make sure that people are okay? And sometimes it is just a question of asking. Rosie said something about connecting with people, and I think that's really key. It's one of the 5 stages of the well-being that we talk about. So if you're not connecting with people or communicating with them, then you run the risk of them going off at a tangent and also not getting your own needs met. So if I had to give a one-word answer to that question, it would be about communication.
Thank you. And I would make it, yes, and I would say again, moving forward from that into self-care for the leader too. So, which is again something that you've just mentioned, Phil, because of the training that you do. So when we had our first conversation, Simon, from my point of view, it's very much around what does Simon need, and then also then checking up on the people who are in your organisation, maybe doing some kind of team member survey, something like that, just giving people in your organisation a chance to let you know how they are and what you think they might need. Because I think one of the important things that we need to think about is, yes, the well-being of the leaders, but also actually, whilst living in the moment, we have to think about what life will be like as everyone reintegrates back into a post-lockdown culture and world. So perhaps it's time to review what you do in terms of the mental health and well-being policies and things like that, and support groups and having people, maybe mental health first aiders in your organisation if you don't already have them. Maybe it's time also to think about some proactive work around that. Are there mental health first aiders? Is everyone across your organisation aware of what mental health looks like? And are there training packages in place, or is that something that needs to be done as we move forward?
That's great, thank you. Now, I've got about 10 minutes to go, so I've got some more questions again that have been sent in, but if there's any particular questions that people listening would like to put to the panellists, please either raise a hand or put them on the chat box below. But the next question really just follows on from what you were saying there. And we're in a slightly different situation now where we've probably got colleagues who've had to furlough, a word that's come about, used an awful lot recently, but many of us will not have come across until recently. But I suppose it's the position thinking of those fellow colleagues who are still employed by the organisation, still are valuable and have a role to play when things hopefully, and I'm sure will change back to a new normal, and how we care for them, because necessarily they have a mixed emotion about why they're in the position, why the company's in the position, but also maybe feelings of what have they done wrong to actually be put at a place where they're not able to go to work and have that social interaction. So both, I suppose there's 2 questions there that I've wrapped up in quite a long winded form, but from the employer's perspective, what could they be doing to best support colleagues who are furloughed, and from a furloughed member of staff who is now probably sitting at home and not having the regularity of work, what would be best for them?
I think there's something around the change curve here and how people deal with change. Thankfully, Rosie's nodding, so I'm going to take that as a positive sign. But the Kubler-Ross change curve shows about how people react to significant change, and it works inside of the workplace and outside of the workplace. And obviously, there's a long period where people's positivity and effectiveness and communication, all that sort of stuff, they feel grotty as they're going on the downward slope of the curve, and eventually they see their place in and change and move forward. And you can reduce the time that people spend in those negative emotions. And again, just to replay the same record, it comes back to keeping them informed and communicating with them. So I think if you are an employer and you have somebody who's out on furlough, you've probably heard people say that in the absence of information, assumption becomes fact. And that's absolutely true. They'll make their own minds up about why they're on furlough or what's going to happen to them, because all their anxieties and their fears are going to be whizzing around in their head. How do you put that to bed? You keep them informed, you keep them updated, you keep touching base with them. These things, for what we were saying about Zoom earlier, I think they're a fantastic way of actually chatting with people. I hate talking to people on the phone because you feel crippled by not being able to see. All you can do is hear them. If you think about all the things that formulate effective communication and how we appear and the gestures and the tone of voice, all those things come together to translate the message effectively. If you can't do that by just talking on the phone, you're not communicating effectively. So these kind of tools could be great. So I think from the manager's perspective, keep in touch with people using these things and just touch base with them. And that allows them to work through those negative cycles and work through their fears more effectively. What do you reckon, Rosie?
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, why I smiled at the very beginning was because change was the very introduction aspect, because it is, everyone is dealing with change, as well as huge restrictions in our daily routines. So yes, I think in terms of that, it's around, I'm assuming that for a manager or for a CEO or whatever, that there is someone whose responsibility is maintaining contact with all of the employees who are either working remotely or furloughed. I've even heard of some companies where people had just been pointed to a new role and now they're actually unemployed because certain companies had chosen to not honour the job offer in the context of COVID-19 and lockdown. So I think it's around, yes, communication. It's around, from a leader's point of view, around thinking about what is the shared consistent message, because as we know, the ethos of a company is generally reflected by the voice and the decisions of the leader. So it's around the leaders making sure that there is some kind of consistency in a policy or a support network or something like that. So that person who is perhaps now getting used to a transition into a different part of their lives has that support. So I think it would be about just reaching out and saying, if you need any help, or to signpost them to other places. I know there are organisations who are putting out links and newsletters. I'm an instructor for Mental Health First Aid England for both the youth and the adult courses. So I know that there are organisations out there who are sending other resources for employees and for people who are becoming accustomed to a very new way of life, that once the lockdown restrictions are in play, are lifted, will actually be a new way of life anyway, because that person may not actually be going back to work full time. Some people will be getting used to semi-retirement or something like that. I think the lockdown will be a catalyst, and is clearly a catalyst for change that is perhaps unanticipated by the government and other bodies who have made the decisions under lockdown.
Fantastic. I think this is going to be my final question. There's no more to follow up on the chat box. If there might be a chance just for one more to come in while I'm sort of surmising this last question. But I think that the profile of wellbeing, making sure that employees are supported is increasing. But I still think there's a way to go in terms of raising the profile and the benefits of a mentally well supported workforce has, as well as a physically well supported workforce. Have either of you got any views in terms of how we could raise the profile of that side of the equation? So it's not just a first aid physical box that we've got, but it's also thinking about the other mental well-being side that necessarily always hasn't got the profile that it could and should have.
I've been working with a few different organisations who, as I'm sure Rosie do, we're desperately trying to achieve that utopia that you just described there, Simon, where the barriers and the stigmas have dropped and people actually do recognise and value the importance and of looking out for each other. Why would you not do that? That's my difficulty. Sometimes get flummoxed by why an organisation wouldn't want to engage with all this kind of stuff. And having to lay out for some people about, productivity increases and motivation increases and all that kind of stuff. But, you sometimes feel like you shouldn't even have to do that. But so working with a few different places, sometimes it's just about creating a new culture within an organization where well-being is okay to be talked about. It's okay for men to talk about their mental health all of a sudden. And, some places are further along that route than others. But we've done training sessions in organizations, half hour or half day slots on what personal resilience and stress management is. We've done workshops on how people can manage their levels of resilience and stress, but that's not enough on its own. There are a whole host of other different activities that people should be able to access if they're genuinely going to be able to meet their own needs, whether that's one-to-one coaching with people like Rosie or myself, or people in mentoring positions. There should be activities people could be done. There are signposts to different organizations and other services that will help people improve. So the more people start talking about it and engaging with people like us, then I think the better it will be for everybody. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I do agree with that, Phil. I've actually been having conversations with CEOs and leaders of organisations, certainly more so over the last couple of weeks, and they know that life is going to be different. The way in which they run their organisations is going to be different, and that they are doing their best to signpost towards online mental health training, for instance, if they can, so that while the employees and teams of people are working from home, they can access that. But there are also it's now also a time to think about that reintegration, the reintegration as we move forward, because as people are returning to education settings or to new settings for work or whatever, it's around making sure that there is a robust process in place whereby everyone has awareness within their organisation about mental health and well-being, so that they can spot the signs of when someone is not okay. And to take it back to this thing that we have to accept now that it is sometimes okay to not be okay. And so again, I've been working with several organisations in the Lincolnshire area as well, with the leaders of the companies who are now considering having a mental health and well-being person in their organisation, and to have more than one mental health first aider, so that if anyone is feeling a little bit anxious or is showing signs, there's at least a protocol in place. So I think it's around reviewing policies, practices, and actually being very authentic in that, so that people feel safe and able to share their concerns, that when they have got a diagnosis of something, they know that HR will work with them collaboratively to work on something that is better for them. So I think it's about being ready to access and recognise that change and mental health and well-being are things that are absolutely pivotal in the context of COVID-19 and lockdown.
I've just done a piece of work with an organisation as well, where even as a whole, they're all doing the same thing, but they work in silos like lots of bigger places do. I've had the opportunity to work with one section of a bigger organisation where they really are all over this. They are providing training for their staff. They're providing support mechanisms and services for their staff. They've integrated personal resilience and all this kind of stuff into their general working practices. They have it at the end of their reviews. So in any organisation, if you can define what it is that you measure success, in this case, it's an organisation that's managed and inspected by Ofsted. So you can even see how, how the culture is different with this particular section of the organisation. But even if you weren't bothered about looking at all that kind of stuff, their inspection results are way above and beyond all the other sections of the organisation, and they're measured in the same way. So you can just see how, if the management team genuinely care and genuinely invest and really are there for their teams and are providing the support that they need, then it does have a massive knock-on on all those other elements that any of us define as success.
Thank you. It does. Ofsted are actually acknowledging well-being now, so that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic, guys. Thank you once again for that. It's suddenly an hour has just slipped away, so I'm really grateful for your help, support in terms of informing on this particular subject. Thank you for all those that have joined us as well on this ChamberConnect webinar. We do have some more ChamberConnect series coming up next week. 2 o'clock is the start time as normal. One of those is on how to adapt your PR and comms strategy during coronavirus, and the other one is growing your network through LinkedIn. So 2 practical webinars that we've got going on next week. More information about those can be found on our website, links-chamber.co.uk/events. If you've got any ideas or any comments or any questions to feedback to our panel today, events@links-chamber.co.uk. events@links-chamber.co.uk for ideas, comments, or any questions that you've got. Please feel free to send them there. My thanks once again to Phil, to Reverend Canon Alan Robson, and to Rosie Green. Thank you all. It's been an excellent session. To you all who have watched, have a very productive afternoon. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.